evening, everyone. This is Michelle again from Best Stop Exchange Appliance Shop, located at 14862 Warwick Boulevard in Newport News, Virginia. We sell refurbished appliances, new scratch and dent appliances, appliance parts. Our website is beststopexchange.com. That's beststopexchange.com, where you can purchase our refurbished new scratch and dent appliances or appliance parts. So this evening we got in this Frigid Air stainless steel glass top electric range stove, and we are going to test it out. This one is pre-owned, so we're going to do a full test on it. I just wanted to share with you the tools that I'm going to use to test this stove out, specifically my multimeter here, and I have my trusty drill with my 1/4 inch drill bit right here for the 1/4 inch screws that are on the back of my stove. Not all stoves necessarily have the 1/4 inch screws. They might have Phillips heads or flat heads. Whatever they have, you will need a drill and whatever appropriate drill bit, and you will need your multimeter. Before you start taking the back panels off of your stove, before you start testing anything out or doing anything on your stove, absolutely 100% do not forget, make sure it's unplugged. Okay, so whenever you purchase a pre-owned stove, the very first thing that you should check for is signs of an infestation. So what you're going to want to do is take off this back panel here that covers the control board, because bugs love to get into the control board. So to check for that, we're going to take this back panel off, and there's some screws. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 1/4 round hex screws. So I'm going to grab my drill right here. Make sure it's on reverse. And remove the back panel. Don't worry, I'll pick those up from the floor later. But make sure you don't lose your screws. But it's just difficult for me to grab the screw and hold the camera at the same time. And I'm going to have to be careful here because the back panel is going to come crashing down. Let's see if I can hold it with my elbow. There we go. I can multitask. Holding it with my elbow. Put my drill down. Grab that screw. Let's pop this panel off and do a nice visual inspection. Oops, I forgot one screw. No big deal. Right over here in this upper corner. Let's get that off. Okay, now that I've removed the back panel and I've exposed the control board, this is the perfect spot to inspect for any sign of any type of infestation from bugs or mice. Mice love to get into these stoves, and especially bugs, cockroaches specifically. So what you're going to look for is any signs of their feces, any of their eggs, dead roaches, live bugs crawling around. And fortunately, this looks beautiful. This is nice and clean. There's no sign of an infestation up top here. And then the next place that you're going to want to check is right down here by the plug. They like to get over here as well. Okay. There we go. Plug looks good. I don't see any bugs, no signs of mice. If you see like little droppings from mice, anything from bugs, it's no good. Do not purchase it, because there's a lot of people that will go on Facebook Marketplace and they'll want to sell their pre-owned appliances, and they're not going to disclose to you that they got a bug problem or a mouse problem. So that's the very first thing that you need to do when you get a pre-owned appliance, is do an inspection for any type of infestation, bugs or mice. So this one's good, so we're going to move forward with testing it. Stand by. and all the electrical looks good and it's going to be safe to plug in. So I'm going to remove all the screws. And again, don't worry, I'll pick those up at the end. But if you're doing this at home, make sure you don't lose your screws. Okay, now I can remove the back panel so I can properly inspect all of the electrical. Put my glasses on here. So specifically, I'm going to look at all the spade terminals, like on the infinite switches here, to make sure that none of them are burnt up and they're all nice and tight. None of them are loose. If you have loose contacts, that can cause arcing and that can cause it to burn up and get damaged over time. So I'm literally going to put my hands on everything, make sure everything is plugged in properly and it's nice and tight. I'm just doing a nice feel and a nice visual inspection of everything, making sure that there's no burnt up wiring, no shorted out wires anywhere. Everything's nice and tight. So far we're looking good. This infinite switch right here is a little bit loose, so I will need to tighten that up. So I'm going to come over here, take the knob off, and see that that's kind of loose. I'm going to need to get a Phillips head to tighten that up. I'll do that later though. So moving on with the inspection of all the electrical, I'm going back around to the back over here. And this is where our broil element is. So definitely want to inspect that, make sure that that's good, make sure all the wiring looks good, nothing's burnt up. So far we look good. Wiring here looks good. This is the wiring that goes to the light socket. That looks good, everything's nice and tight. Here's our temperature sensor. Looks good, that's all plugged in nice and tight. And down here is where our bake element is at. Spade terminals look good, everything looks good. Now, one thing that I want to point out, sometimes on the insulation and the stoves, you're going to see a little bit of discoloration. That's okay. That's just from the heat over time causing that discoloration. Now, it's very important also to check the power block here. On the power block, you want to make sure that everything is nice and tight right here on the power block. You absolutely do not want any of this to be loose. You want everything to be nice and tight. If it's not, need to tighten it. Like that right there feels a little bit loose, so I'm going to grab my drill and I'm going to tighten it up. Now you don't want to do it too much torque and then you strip it. We don't want to strip it. So those were a little bit loose. I need to make sure they're nice and tight. Don't want any arcing on the power block. It will definitely burn everything up and damage it. All right, you see that? That's much tighter now. I'm not getting any wiggle. Okay, great. One other thing that I wanted to review with everybody, since I have the back off, and I think that this is very important and it's great for educational purposes, is I want to help identify all of the parts here. This is very important for homeowners to know and understand. See the infinite switches right here, and we have 4 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the switches that control the temperature on your burners on the cooktop. So that's what those are right there. Those are the infinite switches. And we also have the light sockets here, the cooktop on indicator light and the oven indicator light. Those are those right there. Right here, this is for the oven light. That's where the oven light switch is. Right here, this is the oven control board. So this is where you have your clock and where you can turn the bake or broil on. And these are relays that lead to the bake and the broil. So a lot of times if your oven's not working, it might be because one of these relays are bad. And so that's also what we're going to discuss, how to differentiate if there is an issue with your oven, how to identify where the problem is coming from. But we'll get to that later on in the video. Okay, so moving down over here, as I pointed out earlier, this is the connections for your broil. You can see your broil element sticking out right there. This right here is your door lock. This is all the mechanisms for your door lock right here. This right here is the light socket inside the oven. And this right here is the oven temperature sensor or oven temperature probe. And going further down, we have the bake element right here. You can see the bake element sticking out, and this is your power block. And this right here, this is all called the wire harness. The wire harness. So that's all the parts of the stove in the back. And stay tuned. Okay, so I have my multimeter here and I want to test my bake and broil for continuity. But prior to testing my bake and broil for continuity, I want to make sure that my stove is unplugged. So you see right here, the stove is unplugged. And never test any element on the stove for continuity with the stove plugged in. Make sure it's unplugged. Okay? Okay, this is Michelle again, and now that we've fully inspected all of the electrical, everything looks good. I also want to take my multimeter here and I want to test for continuity with the broil element and the bake element. So we're going to turn it to test for continuity. There we go, my multimeter. And first thing I'm going to do is take one of the spade terminals off of the broil element, push that to the side. Take my leads here on my multimeter, put one lead on one side, one lead on the other side, and we're good to go. We have continuity because we hear that beep, so we're good to go. So I'm going to remove that. I'm going to reinstall my spade terminal. Make sure you do that. You do not want to leave any loose wires floating around, because if you have a loose wire floating around and it touches the frame of the stove, metal to metal, you're going to get a pop and it could cause a fire. So that's very important for safety purposes. Make sure you reinstall that. So now let's go down here to our bake element and we're going to test for continuity here. So same thing, I'm going to remove one of the spade terminals to test properly for continuity. Move that to the side. And I'm going to take one lead from my multimeter, put it on one end, and then put the lead on the other end. And we're good to go. We have continuity on the bake element because we hear the beep. And again, I'm going to make sure to reinstall the wire properly on the bake element. The spade terminal, don't want to leave that loose. Okay, good to go. Good evening, everyone. This is Michelle again, and I've got the back panel off of this stove. And another thing that you want to check for when you take the back panel off, not only to make sure that all of the electrical wiring with the wire harness is perfectly good, you also want to make sure that the cord is properly installed, or make sure that you, if you're going to install it yourself, you've properly installed the cord. So this one has a 4-prong 240 volt 50 amp plug. Here's the plug right here. This is the part that's going to go into the receptacle. This is a 4-prong range cord. So with the 4-prong range cord, you have the red wire, you have the white, you have the black, and you have the green. Now the red and the black, these ones are live. These ones are getting voltage. The red is getting 120 volts. The black is getting 120 volts. The white one is neutral, no voltage. The black one is the grounder, again, no voltage. So it's very important when you're installing this cord or checking it out, make sure it's unplugged. When you're installing it, make sure it's unplugged. And when you install it, make sure you line up the red with the red, the white with the white, and the black with the black. So just pair up the colors. And the ground will always go on the frame of the stove, and they have a specific spot for it. You see the little copper tab right there with the green screw? That is where the ground goes. A lot of people make the mistake of putting the ground with the neutral. You should not do that for safety purposes. The whole purpose of having the ground wire is to redirect the voltage down to the ground in case there's a shorted wire somewhere. So if you have that directly to the neutral, it's not going to function the way that it's supposed to. So for safety purposes, it is absolutely important to put the ground on the frame of the machine right here where it's indicated according to the manufacturer, on the frame, not in the middle where the neutral goes. You should never do that. Another reason why you should never do that is when you combine the white neutral and the green ground, you can never get a tight enough fit with the screw, and I've seen where it's caused a lot of damage because you never get a tight enough fit. So in addition, because it's not recommended by the manufacturer and for safety purposes, and it totally defeats the purpose of having this ground wire, you absolutely must put it on the frame where the ground is supposed to go, not in the middle here. Y'all stop doing that, okay? All right, thank you. Take care. Okay, next, here's what we're going to do. I want to talk about the 240 volts that should be going to your stove. A lot of times when people have problems with their stove, they may not realize that they may not be getting the full voltage to their stove. So I want to show you how to test for the voltage. So the very first thing that you want to do is take the back panel off, which we've already done, and then we are going to test out the plug here. So you do need to be very careful because you need to test this out with it plugged in. You can see right there, I've got it plugged in, and I'm going to take my multimeter and I'm going to test this out to make sure it's getting the full 240 volts. So I'm going to show you exactly how that's done. All right, so here we go. So we've got the multimeter right here, and I'm going to turn it on to voltage and make sure that it's on the ACV for alternating current. And I've got my leads right here. Let me untangle my leads. I'm going to set my multimeter down. Now I do have to be very careful because again the stove is plugged in. I want to make sure to not touch anything with my bare hands. I'm only going to use the leads to touch the parts that I need to touch in order to test for voltage. So the very first thing that we want to do is identify the red and the black wires. Those are the wires that have voltage going to them. The red one has 120 volts, the black one has 120 volts. So I want to verify that the red has the full 120 going to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of my leads and I'm going to touch it to the red right here, and then I'm going to take the other lead and I'm going to put it on the neutral, because again I just want to verify that it's getting the full 120 volts. And as I can see here on my multimeter, if I round up, that's at 120. It's at 117.5, close enough, that's good enough. Shouldn't affect the functionality of my stove. Okay, so let me safely remove that. And now I want to test out the black one, make sure the black one is getting the full 120 volts. So how I'm going to test that, again, I'm going to take one lead and I'm going to place it on the black and one lead on the neutral. And let's take a look at the multimeter here. Again, being very careful not to touch anything with my bare hands. And we're good to go. I'm getting 121.7, so that's good. It's a little bit above 120, no big deal. We don't have to be precisely on the money, but we're good. So another thing that I want to verify is that both the red and the black together are getting 240. So I'm going to take one lead and I'm going to place it on the red. I'm going to take one lead and I'm going to place it on the black. Safely hold those together, still pressing up against the red and the black, and we're at 238.9. So that's close enough to 240, so we're okay. Everything should function properly on the stove. So another thing too that I want to make certain is that the white and the green are not receiving any voltage. Again, that is neutral on ground, and there should not be any voltage going to the ground or the neutral. So I'm going to test the neutral, make sure that that's at 0. I'm going to take one lead, put it on the neutral, and I'm going to take another lead and put it on the frame right here and make sure that that's at 0. That nothing's shorting out and that we're at 0. We're good. I'm going to do the same with the ground, and we're at 0. They're good. So we've tested out the voltage, and everything is good to go. We're getting the full 240 volts, and the 120 volts is going to the red, 120 volts is going to the black, and the ground and the neutral are not receiving any voltage. So everything is good to go with that. So you do want to make sure of that, because a lot of times you can have a bad breaker or you can have a bad receptacle and you're not getting the full 240 volts to your range, meaning that maybe the red line or the black line is only getting 30 volts, 20 volts, not anywhere as close to 120, and maybe it's only getting 200 volts, not the 240. So that'll make your stove malfunction. For example, the oven won't turn on, and there'll be issues. So a lot of people will think that their stove is broken, and there may not be any issues with their stove at all, and they actually have an electrical problem with their receptacle or their breaker, and they need to get an electrician to come and check it out. So that's another thing you should always test for when you're at home and you're saying, hey, what's going on with my stove? I think I have some issues. Test the voltage, make sure everything's good with that, If not, then it could quite be an electrical problem. All right, take care. Okay, hello everyone. This is Michelle again from Best Stop Exchange Appliance Shop. So I've got the stove plugged in here, and the very first thing that I want to do prior to testing out any of the burners or the oven or anything like that is I want to make sure that neither one of the indicator lights are on. I want to make sure that those are off, because right now, even though I have the stove plugged in, I want to make sure that the hot surface indicator lights or the element on light, neither one of those lights are on. And this is important because if when you plug in your stove and neither the infinite switches are on, your oven's not on, nothing is on, the only thing that is happening is the stove is plugged in. If either one of those lights are on, and they should not be, meaning you have not turned the cooktop on, the surface is not hot, everything is nice and cool, you're not using the cooktop, if either one of those lights are on, that is an indicator that one of the surface elements or the infinite switches are going bad. They're starting to go bad. So that's the very first thing that I want to look for. Is I want to look at those indicator lights and make sure, with the stove completely off and the fact that nobody has used it recently, the surface is cool. It's nice and cool. Nothing has been used recently. It's completely off. Those lights should be off. Those lights should only turn on when you turn one of the burners on. So you see I just turned on the front left burner and the element on indicator light. And then in a second, the hot surface indicator light will turn on, because as you can see, the surface is now hot. So that should turn on momentarily. There it goes. It popped right on. So I'm going to turn this burner off, and once it cools off, that indicator light right there will turn off. But the second I turned the burner off, the element on indicator light turned off. This light, the hot surface light, will stay on until the surface totally cools. So even though the burner is off, I just turned it on. It's not safe to touch right now. It's too hot. So therefore, the hot surface indicator light for safety purposes is going to remain on until that surface fully cools. Okay. Okay, we're back here now that we've fully tested the electrical and inspected the electrical in the back there. We know that the plug is properly installed. It is now safe to plug in the stove, which we've already done, and test out the stove. So first thing I want to test are the 4 burners on the top here. And so let's go ahead and turn all 4 of them onto high. Make sure that they get nice and red hot on high. And you do. You see all 4 of them turn on and they get nice and red hot. And now I want to turn them down to medium and make sure that the infinite switches that regulate the temperature for the burners work properly. So when I turn it down to medium, they should turn off from red hot, still stay warm, but not too terribly warm. Then also put it on low. Make sure that they still function on low. And they do. They're good. So that tells me that all 4 infinite switches and all 4 burners work good. Now, if for some reason one of these burners had not turned on, that would either indicate that there's an issue with one of the 4 infinite switches or one of the burners. Another thing that you can do as well is you can lift up the cooktop here, the glass top, to inspect underneath to make sure that all the wiring looks good. So I'm actually going to do that. And the way that you're going to do that is you're going to open up the stove, and there's some screws underneath here, and I see that I need a Phillips head. But like in my other video, how I said before you start looking at anything electrical, you need to unplug the stove. So I'm going to pause the video here, I'm going to unplug the stove, and I'm going to take these screws out, and when I come back, you're going to see that I've opened up the top. Okay, so as I stated previously, we're going to open up the top. I have unplugged it, so it is now safe to open up the top and inspect the electrical underneath here. So I've got my drill bit here with my Phillips head, because these are screws that have a Phillips head on them. And I'm going to go ahead and get these screws out. There's one. Now I'm going to be a little bit more careful with these and not drop these on the ground. And also be careful to not strip the screws, and it's a good idea to use a magnetic tip, which I am using a magnetic tip. Make sure you get it in there, and again, make sure you don't strip it. Okay, now that I've got all the screws out, I got all 3 of my screws out, here they are. Set them over here safely. I'm going to close this. Because with this particular model, it's a Frigidaire model, I got to pull it forward, and then I got to lift it up. Pull it forward and then lift up. And the reason being is it has this little, this metal strip right here that holds it in place, where the screws screw into as well. So now that I'm under here, this is also another place where you can check for an infestation, because mice like to get into the insulation right here, and they'll build themselves little nests. This looks great. For a pre-owned stove, this looks really good. I don't see any mouse mess. It looks good. It looks clean. I don't see any sign of infestation. Looks good. So we want to look at the burners here. These are the surface burners. And you can see the electrical right here. And again, it's unplugged, so it's safe for me to touch it. So I want to just touch everything, do a visual inspection, make sure everything's nice and tight, has no loose connections. Because again, loose connections cause arcing, and over time it can burn up. So these 2 right here, they look good. And I'm doing a visual inspection down here. I've also got my hand down here, feeling where all the spade terminals are, where all the electrical connections are, and everything looks good and it feels good. It's nice and tight. So that's very important when you're purchasing a pre-owned stove, to inspect all of that, make sure the electrical looks good, no sign for infestation, and everything looks good. So I'm going to reassemble this, and then when I come back on the next video, I'm going to show you how to test out the oven. Okay, great. So I'm going to plug the stove back in now that I've inspected the cooktop. Underneath the cooktop, all the electrical and the burners look good. I got the oven plugged in, and now we're going to test out the oven. So right here is your oven control board, and we're going to set the clock. This is how you set the clock to make sure that the clock works. So, clock, you just push up and down to whatever your time is, and then you hit clock again. So good, the clock works. We're doing good with the clock. Okay, so then the next thing I would like to test out is the bake. I want to make sure that the bake works. I'm going to hit bake. I'm going to adjust the temperature. Hit bake again. For this particular model, that's how you start the bake. And then I'm just going to wait a few minutes for the oven to turn on, and make sure that it is preheating and that everything is heating properly. So I'm going to open up the oven, and I've got one of these thermometers in here I'm going to put in the oven. And when it fully preheats and gets to 350 degrees, I'm going to look at my thermometer to see what the actual temperature is. So I'm going to put that in there, and I'm going to let the oven preheat, and then I'll come back online with you momentarily. Okay, so while the oven is preheating, you can see through the oven window there that the bake element is starting to get nice and red hot. So that's a good indicator that we got a good working bake element. But I want to wait for it to fully preheat, and I want to wait a few minutes after that to make sure that it gets to the correct temperature and that it doesn't overheat. If it overheats, that's a good indicator that the oven temperature probe or the oven temperature sensor is bad. So we're going to wait patiently for this to preheat, and then we'll come back online. Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm back, and the oven just beeped, so it indicated that it was done preheating. And you can see on the display here, it says that it's at 350 degrees, and I can see that the light for the preheat is off, so that means it is done preheating. So if you're in your home and you have to step away while it's preheating, you're watching TV, you have to go to the bathroom, and you're like, okay, let me go check on the stove to see if it's completed preheating. Just look for that indicator light, and if that indicator light is off, you're good to go. Your oven is preheated. So let's open up the oven and let's check out our temperature sensor that's in there. It's pretty hot in here. It's at 300 degrees, and that's normal because what the oven does when it's in preheat is it will get to right below the actual temperature that you set it to, and then it's going to beep to indicate to you that it's preheated, but it's not going to be exactly at the temperature that you set it. Give it a few more minutes, and I promise you it will get to 350 degrees. So I'm going to come back in about 2 to 3, maybe 5 minutes at the most, to show you that it is done preheating. And you can see that the bake element has turned back on because I opened the oven to let some heat out. So it said, oh, you've opened the oven, you've released some heat, so let me turn back on, so that way I could heat up the heat that you let out. So we'll come back on in a few minutes, and I'll be able to show you that it is at 350 degrees. Okay, good evening, everyone. This is Michelle from Best Stop Exchange again. So after we heard the buzzer go off and it had indicated that it was done preheating, I waited an additional 5 minutes, and now let's check it out and make sure it's officially on 350 degrees. So just be very careful because it's going to be very hot when you open your oven. And we are good. It is officially on 350 degrees. So I would say that the oven works good on this. One other thing that I want to test out with the oven, let's go ahead and turn the bake off. We're going to hit clear off. I want to test out the broil. So to test out the broil, I just press broil. I want to test it out on high. Oops. Broil, high, broil. So we're just going to wait a minute. We're going to watch the broil element up top there as it gets nice and red hot. And as long as it does that, which it should because everything preheated good with the bake. I already see a little bit of smoke coming off of the broil element. That's just because of debris or whatever, or dust collecting over time. There we go. We see it slowly turning red. Nice and red hot to indicate that that broil element works. Good. Good. So the broiler works, the bake works, everything is good with this stove. Let's turn it off. Everything's good to go. I'm going to turn the light off. Only thing I need to do now is clean it up. And I also need to adjust this handle right here that's a little bit loose. I'll go ahead and adjust that, tighten up the screws. If the screws are stripped, that may be why it's loose. I may have to swap out the screws or swap out the handle. No big deal, that's an easy fix. And I need to give it a good cleaning outside and inside, get all that grease off. And what I like to use to clean these are magic erasers and Dawn soap. Those are my favorite cleaning supplies. And then it'll be good to go, and we'll list it for sale. All right, thank you for tuning in, everyone. I hope you learned something with this video. Take care and have a great day.